there and I was like, isn't there a way to like stop this? She was like, no, there's no way to stop this. And I'm like, okay.
Hello, everyone, and don't forget to order my book, Hidden Struggle Breaking Free and Staying Free. It's being sold right now on Amazon, so do not miss out. Hi, everyone, and today we have Debbie. Hi, Debbie. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm excited to be with you today and your audience. And I would say, hey, when we look at the titles that we give me, I have a wonderful title of CEO of a nonprofit called Anchor Point that I founded and have grown over the last 15 years. I have a wonderful title of mother of 9 adopted children. And then I get to speak and have written a book. And so I just got a lot of things that I'm very blessed to be able to do and get the titles of. But that's a little bit about me.
So, Debbie, can you share with the audience your story?
Sure, I would love to do that because God just does amazing things in each of our lives. But what I like to tell people is mine has a lot of high highs and a lot of lows. So it's kind of like you're going to be on a roller coaster. So buckle your seatbelt is what I tell people. One of the things that you have to know about me is that at a very young age, as a young teenager or whatever, I didn't have grandparents growing up because my parents were the youngest of large sibling groups, and so most of them had passed away by the time I came around. And I had a lady that was had a son that played on my father's football team that kind of adopted us as her grandchildren. And she taught us what it means to have a grandma. And she was wonderful. But for most of her life, I watched her struggle with multiple sclerosis. And so it planted this seed. She taught me joy and suffering. That's number one. But the second thing is, it planted the seed in my life that I need to be a young grandma. I want to be a young grandma. I want to be able to run and to play and to do all the things that she was limited in, right? And so this was my goal. So I'm a girl who accomplishes the things that I set out to do. So I was like, okay, how do you become a young grandma? Well, you got to find a man, fall in love, get married, have children, and then you can be a young grandma. And so I was like, okay, I know what I'm doing. So off I go in my life. And in college, I met my husband and fell in love with him. And we were going to get married after college. And I even tried to convince him to get married while we were in college because I was like, I need to get started on these kids so I can get to this young grandkid. And he was like, we're not doing that. And so he said, I have to wait till we get married after college. I was like, okay. So
You
as
had
soon
a
as
goal.
yeah, so as soon as we got married, I was like, okay, can we start trying to have kids? Because I love kids too, right? But this grandkid thing's rolling around in my head. And he said yes. So we start trying to have kids. And we went on a long journey of infertility. And it was my issues and just couldn't get pregnant. We did tons of different things. And as we know in infertility, everything is just hurry up and wait and wait and wait and try and do the right things. And I remember we were 4+ years into this, and we had like one more shot at getting pregnant through a study at the Baylor College of Medicine. And we actually received the fertility medication and not the placebo. We didn't know that at the time, but we did. And so we had 3 tries. So the first try comes, and lo and behold, my cycle comes. And I just remember going home, throwing myself on the bed, and just going, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I am a terrible mom. I'm a terrible wife. I can't do all these things. All this stuff. And my husband comes home and he's like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, my cycle came and it's terrible and we're never going to be able to have kids and all this stuff. And he was so gracious. He was so gracious for us. But he was like, hey, look, it's going to be okay. We have 2 more tries. And I was like, look, I'm going to be miserable tonight. And tomorrow I'll get up and we'll continue on our journey. But don't try and change me tonight. I'm just going to be fussy. And so I stayed fussy. But the next morning I got up and we continued on. We tried again. And after we tried again the second time, didn't get pregnant. And then the third time, we were blessed to be able to get pregnant. We went to two different doctors, one the fertility medicine and one an OBGYN, about 2 hours apart, two different ultrasounds, and they both told us we were having twins. And we were ecstatic because I'm like, good, because I wanted four kids. And if I can do it two at a time, so be it. We're going to make this happen faster. We're going to get to these grandkids. And we knew as we walked out that journey, it's pretty amazing to get to the next day. And so we started walking and started walking. And at that point, I was the breadwinner in the family. My husband was in graduate school. And somewhere through this process, we figured out how we would handle twins. I mean, we kind of just figured out we could wrap our mind around it, and we kind of came up with the plans that we would make. And so we told our families, they were all excited. And around 13 weeks, I'm going to the Exxon building, going up the elevator, and I start bleeding everywhere. And I'm like, oh, I haven't made it out of the first trimester. I'm going to lose these kids. And they said, go to the emergency room. So off I went to the emergency room. And that was before cell phones were real common. So I didn't know where my husband was. I'm like, he'll find me at some point. And I end up in the emergency room. And, not just with infertility, but also with high risk pregnancies, everything is hurry up and wait. So I get to the emergency room and I wait. And my husband eventually catches up to me. They take me in the back and they tell me that it looks like the bleeding has stopped, that I'm going to need to rest over the weekend. And they do a Doppler on my stomach to see if they can hear the heartbeat. And they said, we hear a heartbeat. We just don't know if it's one or it's two. And they sent us home and said, go to the doctor on Monday. So we go home, and it was quite a rest up, trust God weekend. And on Monday, they sent us to our high risk doctor. And we get in the lobby, and we're sitting in the lobby. And I look at my husband and I go, okay, dude, we think we're going to miscarry. And here we are. And I'm like, we're going to go in there and they're going to tell us we're having triplets. Wouldn't that be funny? And he was like, no, wouldn't be funny. And I'm like, I said, it's going to be all right. So we go in there and everything is big screens, big TV, just everything's huge in a high risk doctor's office.
Oh, so Debbie, when you said you was dealing with infertility,
Mhm.
did the doctor diagnose you or what was going on with you?
Sure. I have polycystic ovarian disease. And so I just have cyst on my ovaries that make it hard for me to ovulate. So it's just, that's been something that's been in my life for years that we had to figure our way through. Right. And it's always been a challenge, but it's something that we did different fertility things to try and work our way through that. So
Having a cyst, does that make you high risk as well, or
it doesn't make me high risk for the pregnancy. It
okay.
makes it very difficult to ovulate, to
Oh,
release the eggs. And so I just couldn't get the eggs out of the system. And anytime you can't get the eggs out of the system, they just make another cyst on your ovary.
okay.
And so this had gone on my whole life, right? From when I first started with a cycle. So around 15, that's just the way my body operated,
You
and
was
made it.
young.
Yeah, yeah. So, and people do have that. That's a very common thing.
Yeah.
But that's where we found ourselves when we did the fertility and medicine, and then after that, we probably weren't going to continue to try anymore. Um, and so that's landed us in that high risk doctor's office. And we went in and she put the probe on my stomach to see what was kind of going on after that really rough weekend. And we found out that when I looked at the screen, I was like, oh, there's three there. And she was like, yeah, there's three. And I'm like, okay.
Mhm.
And my husband's over on the side just going, I don't know what we're going to do. Remember, he's not the breadwinner, right? And he's just going, oh my. And we had figured out twins. And so here we go. We thought we had it under control. And like, oh my gosh, now there's three. So she does all of her measurements and everything. She says, let me get one last picture on the screen of all the babies so that we can print it for you, mom. And I was like, okay, that'd be great. And when she went to do that, she adjusted the probe and everything. And I was like, oh, there's four. And I was like, don't look anymore. Anything above 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is all high risk at this point. I don't know. I don't even want to know. And the lady, she was probably had never seen quads herself. And she was just like, "Oh, I think I'm gonna have to get the doctor." I'm like, "Really?" So she went and got the doctor, and the doctor was so gracious when she came in. She confirmed that there was 4 in there, and she said, "We're gonna figure our way, and, I'll be with you, and we're gonna do this." And I said, "Okay." And so she sat us up, and, the reason I was trying to miscarry at 13 weeks was because I certainly wasn't consuming enough to take care of 5 of us, 4 babies and me, and so my body was just sending up warning signs that it was in distress, right? And so that is why I was bleeding. So at that point, we really recognized, that with a high-risk pregnancy like that with 4, that to make it to the next day was really beyond amazing. It was pretty miraculous, right? And so that changed everything. And we started kind of walking our journey of that. And you usually do what your doctor says. And our doctor suggested that we go to a specialist who specialized in selective reduction, which is actually reducing the number of children you're carrying, with the idea that it'll make it easier to get the other ones to the finish line. But in my world, that's ending the life of a child. But you just do what the doctor says. So we went to this visit with this doctor, and he was wonderful about explaining to us. And so we stayed in his office for 3 hours. We had a discussion, and the discussion went something like this: if you choose to carry, your goal is to get to 30 weeks. Here's the things you're going to face. If you choose to selectively reduce 2 of the children, then here is what your journey is going to be like. And you're trying to get to 30 weeks. Okay. And so we had gone in, we're like, we're not going to reduce the number of children, but you're listening to him. And for the engineer in me, this was good to hear him just talk. And I asked him, I said, what's the probability of getting to the finish line in either case? And he said, it's about 50-50. And I was like, okay, well, that doesn't seem like worth doing what you're talking about. I'll just go this way and trust God with this situation, because we know that God is the author of life and we trust him. And I remember leaving that appointment, and my mom was in town, and she was very upset with me because we were choosing to carry the kids versus do the selective reduction. And she left mad, to go back to Mississippi. And really, it was just mad, being disappointed and concerned, um, because she's watching her daughter in a very difficult situation. So she's protective mama of me, and I get it, but it's still, I'm like, Mom, no. And she maybe would have made that decision. Do you know what I'm saying? And so so she drove back to Mississippi. And by the time she got back home, she called and she said, she apologized, and she said, Dad and I are for you, and we're gonna do what we need to do and stuff like that. And so, but it made me realize that people get pressured by family to do things sometimes that are not what they want to do, or even the doctor just sending us, right? That I have to be pretty strong in my beliefs that I believe God's writing a good story in this. And so we continued on journeying down the road. And at 23 weeks, we decided to go tour the hospital because I was very large and didn't know how much longer I was going to be able to walk. And as we drove down the freeway to get to the hospital, the traffic stopped and the car behind hit us and pulled over, did all the police stuff. And I just remember telling my husband, I said, I don't feel really good. I can't feel anything, but because I'm so big, but I'm like, I don't feel good. I'm off. And we finished with the cop, and I was like, can we go ahead and just still go to the hospital? Because I don't know if I'm going to want to come back, as we continue in the pregnancy, because I'm just so big. And so off we go to the hospital. And by the time we got to the hospital, I told my husband, I said, I really don't feel good. And so I convinced the hospital to check me in and see if I was having contractions, because I just felt so bad. And they determined that I was having contractions about 2 minutes apart. And so they got me hydrated and got everything back under control. And I stayed the night. And the next morning, they let me go home, and they just said, hey, you've got to rest and, take it easy, all this stuff. So my husband and I once again realized, oh my gosh, it's a miracle to make it to the next day. it is a true miracle of God just to make it to the next day. And we continued on our journey, just trying to be faithful, doing the things that we knew we should do. And at 26, right around 26 weeks, I woke up one morning and there was water all over the floor. And I was like, oh my gosh, my kidneys, they're sitting on my kidneys. I'm going to have to wear diapers now. And I'm not going to be able to control myself. This is horrible. And my husband's like, it could be your water breaking. And I was like, oh, that's new. Okay. Because everything's first, right? And so I was like, okay. So we call the doctor. The doctor says you have to come in, let's check it out. And I told my husband, I said, go ahead and get my bag because if this is my water breaking, they're going to have me go to the hospital. And they're not going to, I'm going to have to stay in the hospital till the babies get here. And he said, okay. So we went to the doctor and you sit and wait. And eventually we got back there and they said, one of the baby's sacs has ruptured and you're going to need to go to the hospital because they're always worried about infection and you want to take the pressure off your body so that you can carry them further. And the goal is to get them to that 30 weeks because their lungs at that point can be healthy enough to potentially survive. So as we were going to the hospital, this was one of those times where I'm going, I'm not ready for the hospital, and the hospital's not ready for me. And I was like, oh, this is like jail, and I'm like, I'm gonna get stuck in the bed and I can't get out, and it's just gonna be horrible. And they put me in the room, put me in the bed, and I told my husband, I said, please, please stay with me tonight. So I know you can't do it all the time, but stay with me tonight because I just got to figure my way. And by that night, I had totally kind of lost it. And I'm not a lose it girl. And I'm calling my mom and I'm like, they put me in the hospital. It's horrible, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, Dad and I will leave like 3 or 4 in the morning and we'll drive from Mississippi and we'll be out there. We'll be there by 9 or so. And I was like, okay. We made it through our night and everything. And that next morning when I woke up, um, I knew I was having contractions. And I told my husband, I said, you got to go get the doctor. I know I'm having contractions. And he went and got the doctor. She came in, checked everything out, and said basically, one of the babies had stuck their hand through my stitched cervix and was waving to the world, I'm coming. And, she said, so we're going to have to deliver the baby. And I just sat there and I was like, isn't there a way to like stop this? Like put the hand back and let's just forget that this is how the morning started. And she was like, no, there's no way to stop this. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, can the baby survive? And the answer is medical technology was not around enough. It wasn't developed enough then for the babies to survive. And so I knew that I was going to deliver the baby and they were going to put the baby in my arms and he would pass away into eternity in my arms. And my husband said, well, what about the other three? And she said, we'll have to see what happens with Debbie's body. So they send me into surgery, remove the stitches, and we come back and we wait. And several hours later, little Zach was born. And when he was born, they just simply took him, placed him in my arms. And I just loved that baby. And he took his little hand and he wrapped it around my finger and squeezed as if to say, like, Mom, I'm here. And I just loved him until he kind of just passed away to go to heaven. And then you sit there and you wait. And while we waited, they did some blood work and they were going to see what my body was going to do, if it could handle the loss of the baby. And then would I see it as infection or what would happen in my body? And about 2 hours later, they came back with all the blood work. And by that time, I had 104 fever and I was getting very sick. And the blood work was all jacked up. And they were like, you're going to have to induce these other kids. Or it's going to be bad. And so they induced the other boys and we waited. And a couple hours later, Josh, Nate, and Chris arrived on the scene and they simply placed them in my arms and I held them and loved them as they passed into eternity. And that was a very long day because you go to the hospital with this idea of celebrating births. And here I am needing to figure out how do I plan 4 funerals, right? And so I sat there, and as everybody, my parents left that day, my husband stayed with me in the hospital that night. And as we were in the room at the end of that day, I just, I tried to figure out, like, I wanted to know, like, how do I make my way? I'm in so much pain and loss and all this stuff. And I'm like, how do I figure my way through this? I'm a girl who I can reach my goals. I want to be a young grandma. This doesn't seem to be getting me there. And I just looked, I just remember kind of just rolling around in my head, like, where do I turn to figure my way through this? Right. I mean, like, where can I go? And the only place I could land on was I simply had to trust God because I couldn't figure out anything else. And I'm like, okay, God, I don't know what to do. You've got to help me figure my way. And I will tell you the thing for me, the question that arises when I run into a difficult situation like that is, why? Why me, God? Why now? Why my boys? Why this? Why infertility? Why? It's the question that I just hold on to like this. And part of it is because it is the last thing I have to hold on to, right? Everything else is gone. And I'm like, why? If I just understood why. And God just whispered, I need you to give me your why. And I was like, no, because I kind of like my why. It's like my security blanket right now. And I'm like, you want me to give it up? And I'm like, no. And he's like, give it to me. And I finally just opened my hands and was like, okay, you can have my why. And I said, but now what do I do? I don't, you took my security blanket. What do I do now? And he's like, ask me a different question. And I'm like, what? I don't know what to ask you. And he's like, ask me, how do I survive? And that's the question I began asking. How do I survive this? I don't know how to survive this. The pain's too great. My heart hurts. I have all love for children. I don't know how to do this. And he's taught me some really cool things there. He taught me to breathe first. And if you're not breathing, you're not living, right? So, but breathing also, a nice deep breath puts us in our prefrontal cortex where we can think. Okay. And we're not making emotional decisions. So just breathe. So I breathed and he said, what is the next best step? And I struggled with, okay, let me figure out what the next best step is for me right here in this moment. And I would just figure out what I thought the next best step was. And I would, out of faith and obedience to him, I would take that step. And then he would meet me there and he would shine the light at my feet to let me see what the next best step was. And then he would meet me there and he would shine the light again. And what I began to do was really just walk through a healing process, right? Now, I'm no big superwoman or anything like that, because I want you to get this. The next best step can be very small steps. It doesn't have to be big things. So, like for me in that situation, it could be the fact that I pull the covers off of my head, I get up, I get out of the bed, I brush my teeth, walk around for 30 seconds, and I get back in the bed. But that was my next best step that I had that day. And it was movement. And then the next day, I maybe could do something bigger. And then maybe I could do something bigger. And then eventually, go back to work or do this or conquer this or do these things. But what it taught me was it strengthened my faith muscle every time I would do a good next best step. And it wasn't the next right step, because the right step will sometimes paralyze us with whether or not it is right or not. Right. And should I do it? Should I not do it? So, whatever we think the next best thing is, and you have people in your life speaking into that and everything. And I just began to walk through a healing process. And then what I noticed is that over time, the question began to change. And the question changed from how do I survive to how do I thrive? Because the deal for me was I wanted to live. I wanted to have joy. I wanted to smile. I wanted to be able to do big things for God. And I didn't want to be stuck in the same emotions from 30 plus years ago to where I sit today. Right. And so when I ask that question, and when you and I do, then what we do is we begin to create a sweet space for God to begin to redeem our stories because we're trusting Him. And we're like, okay, how do I thrive in this? How do I smile again? How do I have joy? And as I did that, God opened doors for things like helping other people who have lost children, leading grief groups. It led us on the journey of adoption and adopting 3 times and 9 children that have trauma histories and all kinds of things that were just looking for loving home. And then it led to God planting the seed to start Anchor Point, the ministry that I'm the CEO of. And that ministry impacts thousands of families each and every year. And then it led to Debbie write a book and start telling your story, The Heart of Legacy. And so all of those things have come out of that very difficult journey and trusting Him and learning to strengthen my faith muscle. And He has redeemed that story over and over again. So my boy's legacy lives on in me through all these things. And so that has been my journey over the years to where I sit today.
So, Debbie, how did you and your husband dealt with the loss of your children together?
That's a great question because a lot of people who lose children, married couples, will often end up in divorce. And a lot of time, the reason they end up in divorce is because we don't understand that the grief cycle doesn't operate the same in each of us. Okay, we all operate differently. Grief is a very funny thing. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. So, what happens is I would be up, he would be down. He'd be down, I'd be up. And then this miscommunication begins to happen and it begins to drive you apart as he wants to help you and fix you and you don't know how to communicate and it can drive a couple to divorce if you're not careful. We just made a commitment to have a lot of grace with each other and to trust each other, and we know our hearts, and we kept our eyes on Jesus the whole time and just gave him our hurts and said, show us how to do it. So the same question that I am having of how do I survive, we have that same question as a couple is how do we figure our way through this? And we're not each other's enemy. What Satan would like to bring in and still kill and destroy our marriage and our story, we're not going to let that happen. And so we just were very committed to each other. And we had people in our lives who loved us as we went through the process too. And just if I'm struggling, take me out of the house and let me go get some fresh air, or whatever. But we had safe people who came alongside of us. But it is if you're not aware, that can take you by surprise. And we were very blessed to be able to just be in a place where we could do it together and walk through it together. And I'll tell you, he probably had more grace with me than I had to have with him. But it was definitely both of us working hard together to not let anything pull us apart when it could have easily destroyed.
Can you give me a couple of scriptures that pull you through in that season of your life?
Yeah. So one of them is, do we believe, and I don't have the particular scripture in mind right this second, like where I can just read it, but this idea that do we believe that the God of the universe is writing a good story? And are we leaning into that story? So the question becomes, it's a trust question. Do we trust God with our circumstance, with our life, with our situation, and believe that even though this is a very difficult situation, that he is still writing a good story. And so, can we lean into that? We see examples of that all over scripture where you have people who lean in difficult situations. I just think about Paul and like his journey, and he would be following God, and next thing you know, he's beat up at the place he is. He gets up, and what does he do? He continues on, keeps his eyes on Jesus, goes to the next place, and he's put in prison. Okay. And he goes to the next one. And he had every reason to say, this isn't a good journey. It doesn't look like God's in it. I'm quitting, right? I mean, he could have said those things, but I also really look at our journeys are about when we love Jesus and we ask Jesus into our heart and we are followers of him, then he gave us Jesus as an example of how we're supposed to walk out our life. There is no one that had a more difficult journey in the 33 years that they were here than him. And you see him time and time again, keeping his eyes on the Father, doing the will of the Father, even though he was beaten, he was spit on, he never said, I'm out of here. And so the thing that glorifies God the most is when we are in difficult situations, when we trust and say, your verse says we can have joy in all situations. And we're going to have joy in this situation because that is what makes us look different to the world. And when they watch us walk through suffering well, then it can be an encouragement to those who come behind us who are maybe struggling, but also those who are unbelievers go, something's different. And it gives us an opportunity to say, yes, something is different. And let me tell you about my Jesus, because that makes it all worthwhile.
Mm. So, Debbie, can you tell us how someone who have lost a child, how can they start their step of healing?
Uh, well, let me tell you a resource that's super great that someone gave me. It's a book by Jack Hayford, and it's called I'll Hold You in Heaven.
Mm.
And I don't remember where I got it. It's a very short read, but it just opened my eyes to the new perspective of our time here on earth is very short, and we're going to be reunited with those kiddos. So I think, if I have the eternal perspective, one, I'm like, okay, I'm just separated for just a little while. And I will get to be with my boys. Now, one of the funny things I think is I go, my boys know everything now. They're with Jesus. They have it all. And I'm going, I'm still down here, but there is a sweet space of, hey, I'm gonna get to see them again. So it's just for a moment. And this time will seem very short compared to eternity. But if you are in the midst of going through a challenging situation like a miscarriage and stuff like that, a lot of times what we let it do is we let it isolate us. So if we miscarry, nobody even knows we're pregnant, right? Then we can very easily become isolated, and that will allow us to go down a very negative cycle. So we need to have safe friends that are people that we can like pour our heart out to, and they still see our worthy that we're worthy and we're valuable and speak life into us, and we can ride on their faith strings and their heartstrings, and we need those people in our lives. So if you do not have a person like that in your life, then you need to find one. You got to find a community of people that will come alongside you. If not, come do coaching with someone who's gone through things like that. That can help you get perspective, because the problem is we get very self-focused, and then it becomes a death spiral, really. And the only way the hold of that is broken is when I tell my story and people see my value, and then it gets easier to tell it the next time and people see my value, and next time and next time and next time, and that helps me work through that healing process. So I would say, hey, have you put down your why question? And this is what I learned about why. Do you know what? No one could have told me, and even to this day, no one can give me an answer to why that will ever satisfy me, ever. God himself could answer that question, and I'd still be like, that's not good enough. I don't like being without my boys, right? And so we have to trust God with that why question and know. And here's the interesting thing. When we get to heaven, why won't matter, because there's no pain, there's no suffering. My boys are there, Jesus is there, everything is good. And so that question, as long as we're asking that question, we have ourselves in a situation where we are going to stay stuck and we can't figure our way out. I know women who lost children 32 years ago, and they're in the very same place.
Mm.
And I'm going, I don't want to be that person. And so it's hard for us to lay down that why. And we may lay it down and we may pick it back up, but lay it down and change the question. That different question of how do I survive is a question that has movement in it. And any little movement is going to get us in a better direction. So if we have friends coming alongside, I mean, literally brushing my teeth is not that big, that's not that big of a move, right? But it was significant in that moment when I'm sitting in it. And then the next day, maybe I got up and I did something around the house, so what is it that I'm doing? And that faith muscle just grows and grows and grows. And you find yourself walking through healing. And you got to be very gentle with yourself because in the first year is everything is new. It's all different, right? And I've got to find a new normal for me. And so what happens? I go through the first year and Mother's Day comes along. My boys were born on April 1st. Next big thing on the calendar is Mother's Day, right? And I'm sitting in a church service and they go, who just most recently had their baby? I'm
Mm,
like, uh, do I stand up?
yeah.
And they go, "Oh, tell us about your baby." Well, mine died. That's very exciting in a church service. I didn't do that, but I'm just sitting there thinking. And I looked at my husband. I'm like, I got to go sit outside. I
Mm,
can't handle this.
mm,
And so I had grace with myself and just removed myself from that situation, knowing that at that moment it was just too much,
mhm,
right? Not that I would run from it forever. I've been in lots of Mother's Day services since then. And I've had lots of opportunities to teach lots of pastors that when you have a mom service, you got people who are desperate to be moms in there.
mm,
And this is a hard day. You got moms who've lost children who nobody knows
mhm,
that are sitting there. You've got women who've had abortions that live with regret and shame sitting in your Mother's Day service. And so you've got to figure out a way to not isolate all of them, right? And that's a good journey for us to all learn how to have compassion with each other in those situations, right? So for me, that was just a big deal of giving myself grace as I walked through my first year when their birthdays, when they were supposed to be born, that day rolls around, right? And even now, I'm 32 years since that day in the hospital. And I will tell you, the week before April 1st rolls around, my body knows it. I might not be thinking about it, but my body still knows it. And I might find myself in a little bit of a funk. And I'm like, why am I in a funk?
mm.
And then I realize, oh, it's March 29th or whatever day it is. And I'm like, oh, that's what it is. Okay, I can still take those thoughts captive. I can keep my eyes on Jesus. I can figure my way through this. We also did a good job. If you lose children, to figure out ways to commemorate them. So, like, I have a ring that has all their birthstones on it with my birthstone. It's a mom's ring. We have pictures from the hospital. We have little precious moments that have their names on them, so they're still very much a part of our story. Um, and I might say I have 9 children. I actually have 13, right? But I just want us to all just realize grief is just a very complex thing and we don't want to get stuck in it, but we have to walk our way through it, and being gentle and having grace with each other is the way to help us do it.
So, David, do you have any last words or encouraging words that you would like to tell the audience?
Yes, so if you're struggling today with something that's hard and something that's difficult, I want you to know that you are not forgotten, that God sees you and he is there and he sees your preciousness and he knows your situation and he is for you. He's not mad, he's not angry, he's not writing you off. He is for you. And a lot of times we would like to turn from him, but I would say lean in. Ask him, how do I survive? Because you can do this. You can make your way and you can figure this thing out. And there will be better days. There will be a light at the end of the tunnel, even though it seems dark right now.
Mhm. So, Debbie, can you tell us the name of your book and where they can buy it?
Sure. My book is called The Heart of Legacy, and it's about how to live a focused, faithful, and fearless life. And in it, I go way more in depth of kind of the struggle of that story and how Anchor Point got started and all that good stuff. And then it gives you a section in there of, okay, how do I do this? Right. And so if you're looking for a great place for those next best steps, some of those may be in the middle of that book. But you can get that at thedebbie.simmons.com. You can get all the information at it, and you can learn all the different coaching things and stuff like that that I do there, and all the cool social media handles. So like, follow, whatever they say those things are. Those are the things that I'd love for them to do, and I'd love to journey with people as we do this, because someone was gracious enough to me to reach back and bring me along as I've gone through my stuff, and I love the privilege of reaching back and help bring people along.
Well, thank you so much, Debbie, for sharing.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Part 1 was just the beginning. Join me next week for Part 2 with Debbie. You won't want to miss it.